Crazy Raccoons might be the best Overwatch team we've ever seen. During the Esports World Cup, the team went flawless, only dropping 2 maps by the thinnest of margins out of the 21 they played. And in the Grand Finals, they consistently stayed one step ahead of Toronto, even deciding to beat them at their own game by playing their own comp. They are without a doubt the best team in the world, and in this video I'm gonna show you how.
Like the new Black and Rollins, niggas studying my footwork, I'm James Harden.
So yes, I am recording this on a green screen. I just thought I'd experiment with it. You can let me know your thoughts down below on it. Call me Nakey Jakey, call me Pixel Rory, call me Gerbert Johnson, I don't know. So to start off, I want to analyze Toronto's comp here. They're running a poke, brawl, anti-dive kind of comp with 3 main stages. If you've watched my anti-dive guide, you'll know what I'm talking about here, but the first stage is the prevent stage. What this is going to look like for Toronto is having 2 cores in a 3-2 split. You'll have your Alari Tracer playing together with your BAP, Ashe, and Sigma playing as its own separate core. Now the key thing for Toronto here is to be proactive, which I've spoken about in videos beforehand, but essentially don't just sit back and poke, actually look for advantages to get in the mid-fight. The second stage is a bit more straightforward, which is the absorb stage. Now, when Crazy Raccoons are gonna dive one of the Toronto cores, you need to absorb it with sustained cooldowns, using high ground, and keeping line of sight between the both cores. And the last stage, which is arguably the most overlooked, is the rotate stage. This is essentially keeping Crazy Raccoons on the back foot once they've used their dive cooldowns. Now, in terms of Toronto's choice to ban ball, I assume that's because of SSG's loss against Zeta on the exact same map, and it was pretty ugly. It's hard to successfully absorb ball engages, and Jombin is a specialist on ball. Now analysing Raccoon's comp, there's 3 main things that make that comp tick. The first option is to overload, which is simply just rushing one of the cores. It's great for retaking space and it minimizes wasted time. You'll usually need 4 triggers or advantages to make this work though. The first one is ultimates, so if somebody has a nano boost or your Winston has a primal rage, maybe your Genji has a blade, then that's a perfect time for you to go in. Another advantage is HP advantage, so maybe Jombin's playing Doomfist and he's got a load of overhealth, same thing with Bull and temporary shields. The third one is cooldown, so maybe RuPaul's used his lamp and his regen burst, or the Tracer has no recall. Stuff like that can make it easier to overload one core. And the last but most difficult to describe advantage or trigger is positional. An example might be if someone is playing really close to Crazy Raccoons and he's easy to overload. Another example is if the backline of Toronto Ultra are rotating through open space, that can be a free time to punish them. The second option is to stalemate, which is just to match that 3-2 split, not to push or overload them, but just to match them. This is a great defensive option if you already have map control or point control and you just want to burn the clock or get more point cap. It's also great if your players are qualitatively better. So for example, if you believe Lip and Chorong are better than Vega and Sugarfree, then you're fine sending Lip and Chorong to just match them and duel them. And the third but most overlooked option is the split push. This is basically just a weaker overload, where instead of sending all 5 players to rush a core, you send 3 instead. This is best used if you want to hold space, but you also need to overload one of the sides. It's also a good option if you want to create quantitative superiority. In other words, you use the extra man to help control the space that happens around the teamfights.
Post-edit Kajor coming in here. Not to go on too much of a tangent here, but that whole thing about qualitative and quantitative superiority is actually very similar to how Pep Guardiola coaches football or soccer for my American viewers. I just thought the similarity was interesting, despite it being about 2 entirely different games. Now in terms of Raccoons' choice to ban Kiriko, I think it's mostly a defensive thing. Toronto weren't really known for playing Kiriko that much, they'd mainly stuck to double flex most of the time. Okay, onto the first fight here, and Raccoons choose that stalemate option. You can see it at the top part of the map. Lip and Chorong are mirroring Vega and Sugarfree, and they're doing a pretty decent job. That is until Chorong and Lip start taking damage from Vega, and they get poked out and Chorong initially dies.
Now, the thing that can actually prevent this from happening is, I think, greed from the side of Crazy Raccoons. I would have liked to see Lip and Churong just literally stay on point, force Vega and Sugar Free to come closer to them, and then just force the point from there on. Iliari does not want to play close to a Tracer Lucio, so again, just playing slow, playing the point there would have actually benefited Crazy Raccoons. After Churong dies, Crazy Raccoons decide to overload the side of Vega and Sugar Free, but by then it's too little too late. RuPaul gets a good lamp to Vega, and Vega just jumps up on the high ground and avoids that damage, which means it's a pretty good absorption by the side of Toronto. And then after that absorption is done, Toronto decide to rotate forward and punish the side of Crazy Raccoons, and the rest is pretty much history. This next fight, Raccoons decide to overload, and that's mainly because they have a trigger, and that being Nano Boost. This means it's a lot harder for Toronto to absorb that dive pressure, especially when it's coming from a Winston, Genji, and Tracer. And in terms of what Toronto could have done here, there's two main things. Firstly, I would have liked to see Sugar Free force out Lip on the Tracer instead of going for Shoot on the Ana. This obviously relieves pressure off Toronto because you don't have to worry about Lip on the Tracer because he's gonna get forced out. The second thing is actually where Vega's playing, and I actually want him playing somewhere in this kind of area over here where he's still got a decent angle, but he can outburst over the bridge and help peel for his Bat and Ashe. With that being said, Sugar Free finds a trade onto Shu and almost gets the kill onto Junbin, and that eventually forces Crazy Raccoons to both pop Primal and Beat just to sustain the fight and keep that point alive. Okay, in this third fight here, it's pretty self-explanatory. Raccoons decide to overload Vega on Iliari, and he tries to escape with Captive Sun, but he's just way too split from Toronto's backline, and he ends up dying for it. From there on, Toronto do get trades, especially from someone using the Flux, but Heesang just cleans up Toronto's backline, kills RuPaul, kills Merit on the Cassidy, and it's a done and dusted fight. Onto the fourth fight of this map, or the first fight of this round, the macro is actually fairly similar. Toronto still want to absorb the dive cycles from Crazy Raccoons. This time it's just going to be mainly with Commanding Shout, and the big difference is that Crazy Raccoons comp lacks a lot of verticality. Cass has no verticality, Trace has got no verticality, Queen has no verticality, so if Toronto can get set up on the coast side high ground, it's going to be so difficult for Crazy Raccoons to retake that space. This fight, Raccoons decide to choose the overload option once again, but somehow Sugar Free dies first or gets caught. I don't know how. I'm just gonna assume Jonbin hits the knife because we don't quite see his POV and we just see Merit on the Ashe. Next fight, someone goes over to the Ramatra, and that's mainly because the Ramslow is great at disrupting Queen Shout, and he can just be a big meat shield in his Nemesis form to block the incoming rush. Again, Crazy Raccoons decide to choose the overload option, even investing Window into this. However, they don't even get a single kill, and actually, the Tracer on the side of Crazy Raccoons ends up dying first. The issue here is that someone on the Ramatra actually pushes out Junbin and creates a bit of space for his backline to actually rotate to that coastside high grounds. So what do Crazy Raccoons try and do here? Well, let's go through each of the options. Firstly, they can't really overload the Tracer and Iliari. They don't even know where the Iliari is, but even if they did, they'd be giving the point up to someone and they'd let that flip come through, which isn't great for point control. You would also be giving Merit that high ground, which you really don't want to do. The second option, stillmating here, also doesn't work for the same reasons. You're just gonna give Merit that high ground and you're gonna lose the point eventually. So this is where that third option, split pushing, comes into play. You can have Shu and the Baptiste window from somewhere over here. It can even be a bit further back if you'd like. Meanwhile, you can have Jonbin on the Junker Queen just force the point with that window and to not give the flip to Toronto. During all of this, you send a 3-man hit squad of Lucio, Tracer, and Cassidy to hunt down that Tracer Iliari, and because you have a 1-man advantage, you should be able to win that trade. Next fight, Vega on the Iliari decides to proactively Captive Sun to prevent the dive from Toronto to fucking hell. Bro, I don't even know what I'm saying at this point, like... Next fight, Vega proactively uses the captive sun to prevent the dive coming from Crazy Raccoons. His intention here isn't to actually get a kill, it's to force out something like beat, but it does end up getting Shu and the Baptiste, which is quite lucky. The reason I want to point this out is because even though Toronto Ultra aren't playing a Lucio comp, that doesn't mean that they have to play slow, and conversely, just because Crazy Raccoons are on a Lucio rush comp doesn't mean they have to play fast. It's genuinely one of the biggest misconceptions in Overwatch to this day. Okay, last fight here, and guess what? Crazy Raccoons go for another overload, and this time it's actually really successful. That's mainly down to the beat that Crazy Raccoons have, and beat overloads or beat rushes are super hard for double flex teams to deal with because you can't outrun it and you haven't got a Lucio to match the beat itself. However, I think Toronto could have done a slightly better job here. Firstly, Sugarfree gets his recall forced by, I think, Junbin on the Doomfist here, which eventually lead up to him blinking back main to join the side of RuPaul, Vega and Merit, and if you look at this fight, he's basically AFK, he doesn't do anything. He could have really nicely pincered the behind of Crazy Raccoons when they go for that beat rush, especially considering that the Cassidy is actually really low here. The second thing is someone is miles away and takes 10 years to punish the Cassidy. I don't know why he's so far away, I don't know what he boosted to, again we can't see because there's no overheads. Alright, before I continue, I want to plug my coaching really quickly. Hopefully I've shown that I know what I'm talking about over the last map, so if you want to get the best affordable coaching on the markets, click the top link in the description. Alright, so if you're looking at these timestamps and wonder why it's so short, it's because I don't want to go over this map. It's boring, I hate sniper mirrors, it's just boring to go through. It's also not just boring for me, it's boring for you guys, the viewer, and I would like to increase my average view duration, so we'll go on to the next map. So on Junk City, I actually want to go through the latter half of the map here because it shows how versatile Crazy Raccoons are and how they're actually mirroring Toronto's comp and beating them on it on their chosen map. So a lot of this Malga matchup is going to come down to ebb and flow or push and pull. Basically, ebb and flow or push and pull just mean going in or going out, depending on the status of the fights. Admittedly, this fight probably isn't that fair to go over because Toronto have a big ult deficit compared to Crazy Raccoons. Despite this though, they still almost win it and clutch it at the ends. I think the main mistake here for Crazy Raccoons is that once Lip captures RuPaul, the rest of Crazy Raccoons need to turn and just burn someone. Instead, Chorong and Lip are in open space for a little bit too long, and it results in a big trade for Toronto. Next fight, Raccoons do make some big mistakes micro and macro wise. It actually starts off pretty well for them though, they disengage the High Noon pretty well, but unfortunately, Heesang gets his head chopped off by Merit. Now this obviously is a great shot by Merit, don't get me wrong here, but Heesang needs to be using cover a lot better. If Heesang just blinks to the canister behind him, he avoids Merit entirely and uses that cover to avoid the damage. However, to make matters even worse, Crazy Raccoons pop beat and Kitsune rush, and to make it even worse, they don't even flip the point for it. Toronto just simply disengage pretty safely, keep the point, and repush taking that 5v4. It's a pretty big blunder for the side of Crazy Raccoons, and it honestly gives Toronto that point control. Now I actually want to skip all the way over to the fourth point here because it gets pretty interesting for the side of Crazy Raccoons and it shows how good they are at the game. While things seem pretty great for Toronto, they disengage Shu's window, he gets no value out of it, they're about to cap the point, Heesang just somehow out of nowhere kills Sugarfree on the Farah. Like I genuinely wish there was more to talk about with this, and it's even crazier because Sugarfree gets the jump on Heesang and he lands the first shot, but Heesang just hits back-to-back rockets. I just don't even know what to say at that point. Now when Raccoons actually have point control, the next fight after, they get a pretty clean barrage beat combo and melt the front line of Toronto. Pretty simple fight, right? Well, I think it's a little bit preemptive here and I think Toronto could have played this a lot better. For some reason, Sugarfree decides to match the barrage and gets melted himself, which, just logically speaking, considering that you know that Crazy Raccoons have the beat, I don't know why you would do this. Again, this is where ebb and flow or push and pull come into play. As soon as Heesang's barrage goes off, Toronto need to disengage and rotate around Crazy Raccoons, and as a result, they probably don't get much value out of the barrage. However, this last fight for Raccoons is actually great macro from them, probably probably some of the best I've seen throughout the entire series. They decide to push early here with Malga Overdrive and more importantly, Shu's Window. This forces Toronto to panic, split, and try and desperately touch the point, and all sorts of chaos happens. Firstly, someone gets chunked down to really low HP, he also pops his overdrive, and he's super split from the rest of Toronto. Secondly, Merit probably eats a pulse bomb here and dies in front of Shu's window. While all of this chaos is going on, Toronto still need to touch the point here and get value out of their support ultimates. You've got someone in Narnia, you've got your hit scan dying in front of a window, and you still need to touch the point. If Crazy Raccoons had actually let Toronto set up and get value out of their ult economy, it probably goes to the way of Toronto either way. But by making things messy and chaotic by deciding to go early and not giving time for Toronto to set up, it really puts them between a rock and a hard place. However, Toronto aren't out of it just yet, and their most interesting comp matchup comes on Runasapi. Addressing the elephant in the room, Toronto are running out on Bastion Sombra. The overall macro and matchup is actually pretty similar to Lijiang, where Toronto are still trying to prevent and absorb the dives by the side of Crazy Raccoons. But why are they running Sombra and Bastion instead? Well, if you look at that template of prevention and absorption, it starts to make more sense. Sombra is great at prevention. She can prevent the Tracer and the Pharah on the side of Crazy Raccoons from staging the dive, and she can also absorb the dive pretty well by landing hacks onto Junbin. And guess what? That's exactly what happens. First fight, Junbin pole drivers, and he gets hacked and bursted down, giving Toronto that first fight win. And in the following fights, you can see Sugarfree proactively marking and seeking out that Pharah, and he also threatens the hack onto Lip's Tracer, which pretty much immediately forces them to recall. Now with the Bastion pick, I need to do a bit more explaining. Think of Cassidy and Ashe on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their range and their sustain. With Cassidy having higher sustain, Ashe having lower sustain, but in exchange, Ashe has more range, but Cassidy has lower range. You ideally want to have Ashe as much as possible, but it's a greedy and risky pick to play because of her low sustain. So, why not choose an option that's somewhere in the middle? That is where Bastion comes in. You basically have a hero that is close to Ashe's range, but is also close to Cassidy's sustain. You're basically having the best of both worlds, at least in theory. Now, I know what you're gonna say, Bastion has more sustain than Cassidy, he's got more HP, he's got armor, and he's got ironclads, but in pro play, it doesn't quite work like that. Keep in mind, Bastion's got the hitbox the size of Jupiter, he moves like a snail in his turret form, and to finish that off, he's got no flashbang like Cassidy. These two oddball picks combined lead to Toronto gaining 90 meters and winning the first 3 fights, giving them a big advantage on this map. Honestly, I just want to take a moment to give Kazores a big props for this, not just for thinking of a Bastion Sombra pick, but convincing his players that it would actually work, and having the balls to pull this off with 400 grand on the line in a grand finals against the best team in the tournament. Despite all this though, Crazy Raccoons go from this with just under 5 minutes on the clock to this in a span of about 5 minutes. So let's see how that happens. For the first fight here, Crazy Raccoons do have a big ult advantage, but they do successfully disengage the High Noon from Toronto Ultra, then re-push with just their Nano Boost. There's not too much more to say in this fight, but what I will say is that it's great discipline from Crazy Raccoons to not over-invest in the ult economy this fight. They only use one ultimate to win, and it's really important they hold on to the rest of the ults for fights in the future. The second fight here, Merit just dies off screen. We don't know exactly how that happens, but we do see a frame of Merit going to take the angle on high ground, and what I assume happens is that Merit and Vega just aren't on the same page and aren't together. If Vega was playing with Merit, then when Merit gets dove, Vega should be able to peel him, but obviously that didn't happen. Still though, Toronto do play for trades even when they're down a man, so Sugarfree goes for the EMP onto the Ashe, and he gets the kill. You can even see Chorong play a little bit split, so he can rally the EMP, but he still gets caught anyways. Regardless, the Primal Rally is just enough for Crazy Raccoons to secure this fight win, despite the Ashe dying. Okay, next fight, we're in a full dive mirror, but with Vega playing the Iliari over the Brig. In short, this means that Toronto have a little bit of an advantage in the pre-fight, but it's a lot harder to absorb the dives because you haven't got that defensive capability of the Brig. This means that when Vega is going for his captive son, there's no defensive peel for Toronto's backline, so Junbin gets nanoed and just destroys Toronto. Afterwards, Toronto do start getting some ultimates online, but they just toss 3 into the voids. Firstly, Merit's Bob is just used to stop the cart from pushing even more, and that's easily kited away from Crazy Raccoons. Secondly, someone overextends to try and chase Junbin, but ends up dying for it as a result. Because of this, Merit decides to take an angle on the high ground to look for a trade, but this results in Rapul needing to nano boost him to keep him alive. To make matters even worse, when Merit re-peaks with nano boost, he gets slept by Shu on the Ana. The cherry on the top here is that Sugar Free unfortunately misses his pulse bomb, so even after Toronto used 3 ultimates, the entirety of Crazy Raccoons is alive, and actually, they killed one in someone. Afterwards, it's a pretty messy trade in terms of individual plays and positioning, but Crazy Raccoons brute force the bot to push it to 130 meters because of their sheer ult advantage. If you're wondering how Toronto actually managed to clutch this map despite this fumbling fight, it's actually because of ult advantage again. This is their set of ultimates, and this is the set of ultimates for Crazy Raccoons. In short, if Toronto didn't go for the risk of pulling out Bastion Sombra, they probably lose this map. With that being said, it was very entertaining from start to finish, and it could have gone either way. Now finishing off with Eichenwalde, and it's the most dominant performance Raccoons had the entire series. The macro is pretty similar to Lijiang, with Raccoons deciding to overload the side of the Sigma, Ana and Cassidy. The issue here for Toronto, in my opinion, is why Sugar Free doesn't mark Lip. You can see Lip over here, he's taking the angle, he's looking to go around Toronto and pins her from behind. But Sugar Free's playing Sombra, and actually, he just kinda stacks main in front of the Mauga. Just a little bit of a questionable decision by Sugar Free to not mark that Tracer, because he did do it on Runasapi. On second point attack here, Raccoons decide to go Doomfist and Widowmaker. Widowmaker because of the longer sightlines, and Doomfist because it's just super hard for any ground tank to rotate on second point, especially a Mauga. To open up this fight, Lip hits the shot of his life onto Vega, and he gets a tiny pixel angle through the grates to headshot Vega. Now, because the Iliari is dead, it makes the Ana a lot more vulnerable, which is what you see, and Rapul goes down just as Vega is about to come back. With that being said, Toronto find 2 trades, swinging the momentum back into Toronto's favour. Now, the next fight by Crazy Raccoons is actually really smart macro. It all starts with Junbin forcing the point here on Doomfist. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but what can Toronto really do about this? They can't move and rotate to the back of point because that gives Lip high ground that he can just free range shots from. They can't also stay on the high ground because, well, they're gonna see 9 hits. They can't even send Sugar Free on the Mei to go contest the Doomfist because if that happens, Junbin is just gonna slam up to high ground and take that 5v4. I don't even know what you do here if you're Toronto Ultra. Of course, in hindsight, you would want a Tracer here because Tracer can just blink to the high ground immediately, but they're not running Tracer. As a result, it kind of leaves Toronto in this rock and hard play situation where there's no clear solution for their problem. Last fight here on third point, and Toronto used 3 ultimates just to kill Junbin, and because of that, it puts Toronto Ultra in a bad place to defend the map. Junbin can come back quickly, and Crazy Raccoons have a big ult advantage. Putting this entire map together, and they finish Eichenwalde with a dominant performance of over 2 minutes. Alright, this video's long enough, I'm gonna go back to post and finish this video off. Enough green screen bullshit for now. To summarize this whole series, and frankly this whole video that has taken way too long to make, the thing that makes Crazy Raccoons unbeatable is their versatility. This is also partially why Toronto got so far in the first place, and the hero ban system does benefit teams who can play a multitude of different styles. This might be a controversial take, but I don't think Crazy Raccoons were amazing at any specific comp. For example, that comp on Lijiang, the only thing they really did was overload or rush a specific side, which they were very good at, but when they tried to slow down the pace of the game, either by stalemating or when overloading just doesn't work, they lost key fights. Barring the end of Runasapi, Toronto played pretty well in my opinion, and I'm confident in saying that while Crazy Raccoons are at the top for now, there's a good chance that it changes come Stockholm at the end of this year. Anyways, let me know your thoughts down below.
Do you like the green screen? I mean, I think it's a pretty good addition. Hopefully it increases my average view duration, and qualitatively, you guys like it too. I think it makes the content a bit more personal, a bit more entertaining, maybe a bit more informative. I don't see any major downsides to it. At least for you guys, because recording with a green screen is extremely hard, at least for me, and it's very time intensive too, but I'm good doing that if, again, the results are there. That's it for now, until next time.